Hello everyone, this is CM Kosemen again, back with another lamentable act of piggybacking on popular culture. Yes, today we're gonna be talking about Ghost in the Shell, because the new movie came out with Scarlett Johansson and everyone, and I saw it and I got lots of things to say now. But before that, let's do a little bit of follow-up from our previous episodes. Okay, to begin with, I have to really thank Mr. Megabass and Natalie, also known as Osmatar, for their concept art based on my latest podcast, which was about monsters and strange creatures in legends about Alexander the Great. Now, this was as rarefied as you could get for a podcast, and such a niche issue, and to have that podcast lead to these works of fan art was really a nice thing for me. So you're seeing them now, and this was an happy occasion. Also about classical studies, this is a more serious note, and this is actually something I don't really do. So it tells you that it's kind of serious. Okay, long story short, one of my friends, he is the son of a prominent political activist and hotel owner and architect and overall intellectual genius. But his father is in jail, okay? It's a long story, but my friend Arsen has just been accepted to Oxford and Cambridge universities. And unfortunately, because of his family's predicament, he's unable to afford it. He needs around £18,000, and he's already raised £1,000 in a day. So I'm providing you a GoFundMe link in the comment section and on the pinned comment. Please go and help this guy out. Him and his nice girlfriend Müzeyyen and their siblings Iris and Tavit and their dad were some of the few people I could have conversations like these podcasts in Turkey. I mean, they're really a rare breed and they're in need. I don't want to turn this too much into a bleeding heart story, but please, this is an iron hard certainty where your help is necessary. Please help them out. Okay, moving on to Ghost in the Shell. I don't know how you could move on from a serious announcement as that, but yeah, I saw Ghost in the Shell. And if you don't know, this is a fantastically well done story about a future world in which the boundaries between man and machine has blurred to such an extent that almost everyone in the street has a cyborg part now, or something like this. And of course, the story is not original. We shouldn't expect minds in 2017 to come up with something this good. And of course, it's based on an anime by a certain Mamoru Oshii in 1995, which itself was probably one of the best films in recent history, if not the best anime. And that in turn was also based on a manga by Masamune Shiro. The Ghost in the Shell universe is very varied. They have like a few more movies and some really neat series cartoon adaptations, a lot of mangas, and a truckload of things which only came out in Japan, like video games and stuff like that. Now, I'm not an exquisite purveyor of this kind of anime, Japanese kind of culture, but this movie, I'm talking about the 1995 animated film, its sequel, its other sequels, and the following serial adaptations like the Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, so on and so forth, they are some of the most well-built speculative universes out there, and they're full of this amazing and also very human moments. For example, the standalone complex series has a group of robotic tanks that look like jumping spiders, and they're known as the Tachigawas or something. And in every episode, they have this really cute, kawaii like Japanese schoolgirl voice type conversations about life, morality, what it means to be a robot, what it means to be alive, sentient, whatever. And they're just like a side joke in this spin-off series, you know? But even those are so profound, and I mean, YouTube is awash with clips with these characters. They're called Tachikomas, I believe. And the series is called this Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex. Please look them up. And so this recent movie that came out in 2017 is based on mainly the 1995 animated film, but also has trappings from the other extended universe as well. Now, from this point on, I'm going to assume you kind of know or have seen both the original animated film and the recent 2017 adaptation. And obviously there's a lot of issues about these things. Like, I mean, it's very clear to see that Scarlett Johansson's career for the past half decade has been geared to this role. I mean, she was in that really awful film Lucy, which is probably the worst film to feature science, and it's like something like prostate cancer. When good directors get old, they start making crap like this. So Luc Besson was an amazing film director. He was the guy behind the dramatic genius of The Fifth Element. And in that other film with Scarlett Johansson, Lucy, he's been reduced to this kind of extremely simple and cringe-worthy mistakes in science. Like, there's a part in it that says, humans can use only 7% of their minds. False. Dolphins use 20% of their brains. Also false. And because of this, they evolved sonar. So it's like complete bullshit. So in the movie, Scarlett Johansson is infected with this kind of brain awareness increasing chemical or virus or something. So when her brain capacity hits 20%, she evolves a sonar, which is like absolute most crack shit thingamajig. I don't know. It's just worst, most cringeworthy science imaginable. Dolphins evolve sonar because they live in an aquatic environment. And contrary to these romantic claims, they're probably not as smart as people. They're still smart enough to have things like rape, murder, and communication, language, and ethnic strife, and clans, but not human smart. Anyways, so that was one movie that kind of started Scarlett Johansson's move away from this kind of smart, blasé, curvy Hollywood woman into a kind of thinking alien, sci-fi nerd's wettest fantasy kind of woman. And then she was in another film, I can't remember the title now, Under the Skin or something, where she was kind of portraying this incomprehensible mimic alien that, like, there were these like art house scenes in which she was seducing men and just staring them so hard in a dark room that the men suddenly explode into these drained husks of skin. And that was actually a slightly better movie. And then she was the voice in the ultimate iPad Siri wet dream film, Her, in which you see Joaquin Phoenix at the advent of humanity's domestication into hipsters by super intelligent PDA assistants, and was an okay movie. But once again, but you could see Scarlett Johansson's evolution to a kind of sci-fi lady, and I don't mean this as a critique. I mean, Lucy was a bad movie, but whatever. She's really fitted into this role well. She was also obviously playing this other lady in the Avengers series, the Black Widow or whatever. And of course, that only helps the sci-fi build up. So it's a neat case of career guidance. And in Hollywood terms, in acting, also in overall career terms, like even if you are like an accountant or an advertiser or whatever you do, it's good to have a certain team in what you're doing. So you're not only an actress, but you're also an alien sci-fi actress. And of course, these are connected with people's overall characters and even things as basic as how they look. Which brings us to the whole whitewashing argument against this recent 2017 film. So a lot of people say that this film and many others have this kind of whitewashing thing, and I somewhat agree. I mean, look, there are obviously a lot of Asian actresses who would fit this role much better. And I don't think the audiences would care. I think it's a case of studio execs playing it safe with a multi-million-dollar investment. They're not worried that the character will be less likable if she's Asian. But they simply notice that Scarlett Johansson has this kind of character development in her acting. And they want to feature her because in the strange movies in the strange world of monetized films, even names can attract a considerable number of rubes and, I don't know, just random people from the street. So I think it's a forgivable sin that you have Scarlett Johansson, and it's not racism, it's not even unnoticed racism, it's just that when you make a film with lots of money in this day and age, this may be what you have to do. But once again, I wish they'd cast the girl who'd played Trinity in the Matrix series. And I think she would make a much better Major Motoko. And then, yeah, there's that argument. But that's strange. I think there was another kind of whitewashing in the film. And that was I'm not talking about race, but still the whiteification of the city. You see, in the original 1995 Ghost of the Shell, the city is a really dark and living and sublime and well-designed world, which tells you a lot about the characters, the film's themes, and so on and so forth. And, you know, that was an animated film, so they would spend valuable screen time animating things like views of garbage in a canal or ordinary boats or things. And this was one of the things that made the original film so extremely sublime, you know. And in this new adaptation, the city has been whitewashed, not racially. I think some of these race arguments these days, they are non-arguments, but I'll leave it at that. So the city is whitewashed, not in terms of race, but it's been turned into this kind of colorful, vibrant city, this kind of iPhone commercial city that there's holograms everywhere and there's the cars going on the roads, and like, I don't know, it's this kind of, still it's a nicely done city. I think there are shots where they show these really strange characters, and obviously there's a lot of world building going on down there, but they took all the grit out of it and they overplayed the weirdness aspect of it. So it just looks like Portland, USA. You know, everyone's kind of like hipstery, and that's one thing I didn't like. And that's a kind of unnoticed prejudice or unnoticed bias in the filmmaker's behalf, I think. It was such a slick city that it didn't really give the image of this world in turmoil, which whatever. Anyways, yeah. So that's my opinion on that other point. But yeah, the film the 2017 film is still a good movie on its own, I think. Yeah, there's a kind of overchewed gum, because if you've seen the original anime, it doesn't really compare. The original anime had this kind of really interesting theme in which the main character, Major Motoko, is trying to figure out who she is, and she may be entirely done android or whatever, and then she has to go find this dangerous hacker, which turns out actually to be the incarnated version of the internet, basically, that has achieved sentience. And in 1995, watching this was like a revelation. So at the end of the film, Major Motoko, who is a cyborg who may be artificial but possibly has some distant human roots, meets this online sentient internet god spirit, and there is no antagonism really after that. They kind of fuse, and a new organism is born, and a new world is created, so to speak. And if you notice, in a lot of especially Japanese films, there's this narrative. The Japanese are expert at creating these two become one, two versus one, but they were the two halves of the same thing, or a new world is born kind of thing. So, and there were many other films like this. One of the most noticeable was the 1989 film by a certain Shinya Tsukamoto called Tetsuo Iron Man, which is a perverted black and white white knuckle roller coaster ride of flesh, metal, and fusion. And in that film, there was a weird guy named the metal fetishist who somehow gets his kicks by inserting bits of wire or metal into his body. And for some reason, he is killed by this other guy who changes into another freak, which produces bits of body from his own flesh. And they fight a weird duel, and it's all filmed in black and white, which like with the most trashy practical effects you could find, but it really works. And at the end, the metal ingesting fetishist and the metal producing freak come together, and they like meld, and they turned into this kind of penis-shaped rocket car, and they say, our law can destroy the whole world. Our law can turn the whole world into metal. And they turned into this amazing car, and they just... and it's amazing. But thematically, there's a similarity. Two extraordinary figures come together, and a new world is born. So that was very interesting. In comparison, 2017, we see Scarlett Johansson's Major Motoko was actually some sort of refugee, hinting at present-day events. But actually, she was not a refugee. That memory was implanted. Plot twist. Anyways, that memory was implanted, and it turns out she was a garden variety human. In fact, she was a protester against the overgrowing reach of technology. She was a kind of green protester with her boyfriend, and they were caught by this nefarious semi-governmental profit-driven company, and they were turned, their brains were implanted into cyborgs, and they were turned into these living weapons. And then her boyfriend, the guy who will, to me, be forever known as the Facebook guy, Jesse Eisenberg. So her boyfriend was also an activist, green activist. They were trying to protect trees in a park or something. And they were like killed by these bad company guys and turned into these bioweapons. And in the 2017 adaptation, the dangerous hacker is actually Jesse Eisenberg. And it turns out, like, do you remember? So the lovers are reunited. It's a much more Western narrative kind of reunion. And it also has a very interesting plot twist, because unlike the old Ghost in the Shell, which, like many other cyberpunk worlds, actually celebrates the growth of this borderless, amorphous, cross-platform, para-identity world, In the old Ghost in the Shell, this fusion was a celebrated thing, and the lowering of the barriers between man, machine, intelligence, AI, whatever, was a good thing, and it was a kind of more optimistic 1990s narrative where there will be no borders and government enclaves or whatever. In fact, I think a text explanation at the beginning of the film explains this, that some ethnic enclaves remain and basically the whole world is a global soup held together by corporations and new technologies now. So that was a good thing in the 1995 movie. You see that this has somehow become real now, in a much limited extent, of course. But in the present day, we do have transnational corporations and a sort of mellowing of the borders and a mellowing of identities. And guess what? It's making less people happy than we thought it would. So in this new movie, Motako is not an identityless cyborg, but you learn that she actually had a mother. And then she actually was a freedom fighter. She was fighting for the trees with her boyfriend, and it was only the evil corporations and their evil machines that did this. They were actually Luddites before they were turned into the most cyborgy cyborgs ever. So I found that flip very interesting in this recent movie. And yes, some of the film is a bit of a vanilla, but still this twist makes it very interesting to study. I mean, there were even like scenes in the climactic battle of the film. In the 1995 film, it's again versus a giant robotic spider tank, but it's set in a disused natural history museum, and they're shooting at each other, whatever, and then in the resulting firefight in the museum, there's a very finely carved tree of the life showing the evolution of man. So this tree is rewritten by metal and bullets during this firefights. Like these bullets walk up the tree, and it's obviously a metaphor foreshadowing the birth of this new cybernetic organisms and other things. Now in this 2017 film, there's again a fight against a spider tank, but the spider tank is led by the bad guy, who's like a bad Steve Jobs and a bad Martin Shkreli or whatever. So he's willing to do anything for a profit, and he doesn't care about life. And there's no tree of life, there's no museum, in fact, in this film, but there's a park, and in the middle of the park, there's a very old banyan tree, and Motako's old lover, Facebook guy, stands defiantly in front of the killer tank, protecting the tree. So that's a neat metaphor. God, I don't know what there is in these animated films that draw people into these deep discussions about metaphors, identity, nations, whatever, but it certainly is very compelling. At the end of the day, it's only an artifact of popular culture, but it is such an artifact that people could talk and debate on and on about it. And I think such debates make people smarter. Not smarter, but they make our lives more colorful and a little bit more aware, I would say. So that was an interesting point. But also, how realistic do you think is this premise? Do you really think that there could be a mind and machine harmony, a mind melding? 2 weeks before I recorded this podcast, so I'm recording it in April 2nd, 2017. 2 weeks ago, this everyone's favorite techno guy, what's his name? Tesla. Not Tesla, but what was his name? God, I'm recording this thing alone. I wish there was someone to answer. No, this messianic guy. I have to Google it. Tesla owner. Who is the owner of Tesla? Elon Musk. Okay, of course, this guy. Okay, I won't deny that Elon Musk is a great entrepreneur, and his major contribution to humanity will be in terms of electric cars, solar panels, and batteries, and nothing else. All the other stuff about going to Mars and the announcement he made last week about mind-machine interference or whatever, these are all, once again, it's like what Scarlett Johansson did with her career. She took up all these roles with kind of this science fiction kind of things so that she would be more iconic and instantly recognizable. Same story with, what's his name? I shit you not, I forgot his name again. Tesla owner. Elon Musk. Okay, same story with Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a great maker of electric cars, and I won't deny, obviously, his genius in trade and development and R&D or whatever. But ultimately, all the other thing about mind machine, he launched a company to create mind machine things, or he's going to make the Hyperloop, which is going to go around the whole country, carrying Silicon Valley workers around. And then the other thing with going to Mars, and he wants to start a colony. We will talk all about these in the next podcast maybe, because these are actually extremely dystopic visions, if you think about it. If you make Hyperloop, who will pay for it? Who will be rich enough to afford for a Hyperloop ticket to San Francisco? Do you think it's going to be you and me? Well, not me. Do you think it's going to be Mr. Guy on the street? No. Do you think it's going to be the guy who would go to the movies because Scarlett Johansson's name and face is on the poster? I don't think so. If ever built, Hyperloop would be an exclusive corporate privilege. God, I had a friend, and she's a good friend, but so turns out she knew someone in San Francisco who was in talk with someone who was going to build the Hyperloop, and this other friend would design the UX interface for the Hyperloop's windows so that the Silicon Valley guys wouldn't be bored in it, and they would watch some realistic looking landscape from the windows. So there's a guy who knows the guy who's doing this, and he is doing the UX for these goddamn windows, and oh, what a privilege. And my friend was talking like she had met a guy who had known Jesus. There was this kind of messianic thing about it. And come on, what good is that thing gonna do for you? It's probably not even going to be built, but it's just for character advancement, so that the guy is more recognizable, his company is more recognizable, which in turn will make that split-second difference when you're buying an electric car, which is not an inconsiderable investment. So you say in your rootest subconscious, you say, yeah, I'm gonna fork out this much cash for an electric car. Woo, I'd better buy it from the guy who wants us to live on Mars. It's just an extremely convoluted form of advertising. And pardon me, but my views on this are rather brash. Or same thing with having a colony on the Mars. I was overhearing this conversation by a coworker, and this is another person who's scared to go on planes. Okay? And then she was saying, I wish they built this Mars colony so I could go up there away from all these stupid people. Yeah, right. If the Mars colony is built, who is gonna go there? Smart people? Ad agency workers in a third world country? Cargo cult members of the cult of advancement? No. Not even Elon Musk himself. profits be upon him, is gonna be up there. I'll tell you who's gonna be on Mars if that thing ever gets made. The poorest, the criminals, or whatever. It's just gonna be like the settlement of Australia in the early 1800s. Criminals are gonna go there because no one in their right minds would want to live forever in an air-conditioned cubicle. I don't know, growing potatoes from his own shit. I don't know. So again, anyway, big tangent here, but yeah, that's what I'm basically saying about. What were we talking about again? Yeah, Ghost in the Shell. The new movie takes a place in a more jaded society towards technology, I think. I think because of these kind of fantastical developments in technology and society and economics, they have grown out of the comprehension of the everyday Joe in the street, okay? So now they're creating more problems. So the new movie has Major Motoko cast, not as a willing crusader of the mind-machine union, but as a kind of green environmental activist. Oh, but yeah, we were talking about how feasible this thing is really. Yeah. So Elon Musk recently launched a company whose aim is to fuse human minds with machines. I guess with no symbolic intermediaries, because in a way our minds are already fused to machines. If you read the text and type the text, then yes, your mind could be said to be fixed, and then the internet could be said to be a text-based compendium of humanity's telepathic and subconscious inheritance. In fact, I think all books and all written stuff should be seen as a mind-machine interface. But of course, the machine here is a very simple machine, paper and ink. But I think it's a much more robust, substantial, and effective machine than anything that's coming around the corner, even in this day and age. The internet, the smartphones, everything, they have only accelerated the process, in my opinion, but they have never superseded it. And, you know, the theories of the mind that we develop, back in ancient days, some people likened it to an abacus. When computers first came out, it was likened to a computer. Now it's been likened to a network because, surprise, we are living in an age of networked computers. But I think none of these things are what the human mind really is. And I would be lying if I said what's it about, but if you just even skim read through the latest in neuroscientific research, there's not much of a consensus on what minds, memories, personalities, even intelligence constitute. Perhaps our wetware minds simply cannot comprehend themselves, and this is a very likely possibility. So I don't see in the future anything like you're going to be able to plug in and be able to control a machine. You're still going to have text-based, interface-based intermediaries, and I think to be realistic, that's going to dampen the Ghost in the Shell effect somewhat. But of course, text-based interfaces and the narratives we build around those interfaces can still be said to constitute a form of mind control. You know, in the Ghost in the Shell series, the major hacker can like hack people's minds and have them do other things and whatever. A very primitive version of that already exists now. It's not a cable going into somebody's head, but it's the political symbols, the news we read, you know, all the kinds of this debate about right wing, whatever, or like manipulate the news enough, you could have people do anything. And I think the Ghost in the Shell effect is still already taking place. I don't know for left or right. I really don't know. But in 100 years, people will look at today's news consumption, social events, social media, and they will realize, yeah, probably there was some hacking. But the hacking wasn't with ones and zeros and cables plugged into people's skulls. The hacking was with political symbols, planted news stories, and the generation of an overall climate of fear. Yeah, I mean, if I was stupid enough, I could say that this is what's that term people like to use? The neo-right? Alt-right, yeah, the alt-right messages in the 2017 Ghost in the Shell. But I'm not that stupid. I don't think there's an alt-right agenda to this movie, but the theme really resonates with some of the other themes that are being used by people who are fed up with what they perceive as a loss of control over technology, as a loss of control over their livelihoods, and as a loss of control over their societal consolidation, let's say. And nowhere else is this more apparent than the final bit of the 2017 Ghost in the Shell. I'm going to make some allegories here, but what happens is that Major Motoko finds the hacker, who turns out to be her activist teenage boyfriend. And they were just fighting to protect the trees, and they were actually fighting to refuse cybernetics. Something that was completely absent from the old film. So they realize that the real bad guy, actual evil guy, was the kind of corporate guy who was making these cybernetic implants and using them as company assets for national security protection. Okay, he was like the bad Elon Musk / private military contractor guy. So in the film, there's another character. Both Major Motoko and her friends are members of a government organization, and this is very important, named Section 9. And Section 9 is headed by this very wise, slightly Yoda-like old guy who is like super badass and super smooth. So the bad Elon Musk guy in the 2017 film threatens him basically, and then he says, a rabbit shouldn't threaten a lion, or something like this, a wolf. And then what happens is that at the end, the head of Section 9, this old guy, corners the evil Elon Musk dude. So it's very clear to understand that this old head of Section 9, the master, is an allegory of the government. And then on the cell phone, he asks Motoko, who I think is an allegory of the people, because they were turned into these cybernetic things slightly against their will by these profit-driven corporations. And the bad guy represents the corporation, and to him, all people are assets and whatever. So the head of Section 9 on the cell phone asks Major Motoko, do I have your consent to kill him? And Major Motoko says, yes, you have my consent, take him out. And then the old biddy shoots the bad guy in such an orgasmic scene of destruction that as a viewer, you're enthralled, you almost have a kind of orgasm, because the evil guy who cared for nothing else than profits is destroyed by the government for the people. And that's a very scary or hopeful, depending on your viewpoint, scene, because you get to see that it's just up to the government, who's like a slumbering giant in our society for the past 20 years, just has to ask the people, are these technological, commercial, social, transnational processes, are they, oh people, are they getting too hot for you to handle? And if the people give their consent, it could be all over, just like